previous video and a previous concept that we had, and then we're going to try to move forward in order to explain it. If you remember, we had a pizza-based calculator. We had all these calculations built into it and an output. That was in a previous video. And so what I would recommend is that you go back and just check that you understood how all of that works. This time around, we're going to simplify this, and we're going to simplify it in the following way. We're going to say that the area, yes, we still need the area. We still need something to calculate the price per squared centimeter, and we're going to give back that price. Theoretically, and we'll come to more complexity in a second. So then our main program just gives us for a single radius. We're only interested in one circle. We're not going to have a base price or any other price. We calculate the price based on this price per square centimeter, and then we output that pizza price. Okay, so I'm going to pause. I would pause that on screen, and I would copy that in and test that it works. So I'll pause for a second so you can just hit the pause button on your video and then copy it. Okay, I'm assuming that you've now copied that code and we can proceed. I'm going to run and just test it, and then we're going to look at this whole business about how we decide to build in these decision structures, these if statements. So if the input radius is 23, pizza price is 24, okay, and it works it out by passing that in there, jumps up to the price of pizza, uses that value, and then calculates and returns that. Notice it calculates the area function. So what it does is it act in terms of BODMAS or whatever you might, if there's a function there where you're passing a value, which is this function up here, it will evaluate that first, return that answer, pop that into there, and then multiply it by that value, and then return that. So that's quite a tricky concept, but I've left it in there because I'd like you to see it. So now we enter a very interesting issue. What Matthew has added to the notes is a condition. The restaurant isn't making so much money, so if the area is less than 400, it actually needs to add an extra £2 to the price. Okay, so currently it has a price calculator and it does all of that based on the area. So there's two ways we could do it. We could just go into the price of pizza calculator, and in here we could say, we could build in a calculator to say, well, if the area, and what we might like to do is actually just store the area value, right, and then we calculate the area passing in the radius. So we get the area value, and then we say, well, if the area value is less than 400, then we're going to do the process. We're going to return one type of response. What will we return if it's less? Else, because the only other condition is if it's not that, then we will return differently. So this return here is true. We'll use that one when the area is larger. So let's pop that one into there. Notice it's indented, but here, if the area is less than 400, it'll take the area value, multiply it by the price per squared, and it's going to add an extra £2. Okay, so let's just test that actually works. So from the point of view of the user, they have a price of pizza, you give it a radius, but they don't know any of this internal logic of what it's going to return, right? And there are other ways of manipulating the code, but we'll come back to that. Let's not talk too much. Right, let's run this and see it work. What we're going to do, so we're saying if it's less than 400, so let's drop that in there. Let's say the input radius is, I don't know, 1. The pizza price is 2.047. So interestingly enough, has it added the 2? Well, let's just comment that end bit out so we can see it and check it, right? Bear with me a second. I just got to hit the right key. There we go. So that was the calculation before. So it actually makes no difference if it's less than or greater than, we want to just check that it's actually adding another £2 to the price of that pizza. Right, hit main and I put the radius at 1, and you'll notice it's 0.047. Here it's gone up by £2 because we were adding £2. So that seems to have very neatly resolved our issue. But the problem is that there are two problems. One is, what happens if future-wise we change? We find that pizzas under 400 isn't the problem, it's pizzas under 300, okay, for example. And what happens if the price per squared centimeter, this value here, we would want to change, and we would want to change that. So we actually want to pass in more values. So the price of pizza is based on, let's add a price per squared centimeter that we can add into it, and the advantage is that we can change that if we're required. We can pass in, now here's an interesting question, we can pass in this constant, this area constant. So we could say minimum size, right? We'll just call it that for the time being. And then we say, then what we want to do is add a certain percentage of money, which is this £2. What I'm trying to do is get rid of these numbers inside here, because they're just random numbers. I want to give them a meaning. So what happens if I say add additional cost? So I'm going to ask my user, right? Let's repeat my input statement here, and I'm going to ask my user for the price, for the price per squared centimeter, right? So let's go in there and say to my user, please will you give me that price per squared centimeter? So please, what is the price? Let's say price per centimeter. Now I'm overtly squared centimeter. I'm overtly making all of this an input issue, but you could easily just make them constants, right? So that's price per squared centimeter. That will come in here. What happens if the minimum size, so let's say that my boss wants to actually say, well, the minimum size, I want to remain flexible. Let's ask our user for that. So we can just input, and you'll notice that my strategy is to use a lot of copying and pasting and adjusting. Please input minimum radius or minimum area, okay, and let's also add in additional costs as a piece of user information. So we've got additional cost, and let's just say that we're going to just hard code that as 2. Okay, every time it falls below a limit, I'm just going to ask for 2. Now I get all that information in, I pass it into the price. So over here, over the cost, I need to repeat this information received over here. So let's receive it and then replace it. So the price per, bear with me a second, I've copied it into the wrong place. I wanted it there. Right, I no longer need that. Okay, what else don't I need? I don't need the minimum size because I'm going to pop it there, and the additional cost I'm going to replace there. Now this is an odd strategy if you're just looking at how to make if statements more complicated, but this is a kind of thinking process that you calculate the price based on these variables. Remember, the area is coming from the area value is coming from the area. If it's less than the minimum size, which might be 400 here, or it might be 20 or 10, depending on how the business is doing, the additional cost should also be able to be changed. So now if we run this, we end up with a much more flexible program by using parameters. Okay, so this is bringing in stuff from the previous week. So let's say the input radius is 10, the price is 0.0, what's the number? Let me just quickly say 0.014, let's say, and the minimum area. So if it gets below 200, then we know we've got a problem. And there's a typo, and the typo says takes 3 arguments, 4 given, right? So let's have a look. 1, 2, 3. I think because, bear with me a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see that I've just accidentally got rid of the comma there. So it's got a typo there. Hopefully you spotted it. You can make your code work. So let's just run this again. Now, the reason that I'm showing you this in this context, so if we say 12, the price is 0.015, and the minimum area is, let's say it's 200, right? That's how much the pizza price would cost. It's not rounded up, and it's always assuming that I'm going to give an additional £2 charge if it falls below that size. So now I have quite a flexible program. And what this type of thing allows you to start doing is changing. If you're going to start understanding how to use these if statements and multiple if statements and design them, then you need to think about how variables are passed around your application. Because if you don't connect the two things, you will end up writing more code than you need, and you will end up not taking full advantage of this particular practice. So what I would recommend is code what I have in front of you, then go back to Matthew's sheet 11a and attempt to code using this strategy his final example, where the price of pizza is dependent, and he's used diameters, I've used radius, so you have to be clear which of the two you want to use, and stick to radius, so adapt his code to make that work. But here's the interesting thing. The flavor which Matthew introduces is another change of the price per squared centimeter. So in his, he's actually added it here. But what I'm suggesting is that that input of the price per squared could even be an if statement of its own. So let's say that if you change the flavor, right, you select a flavor, you are changing the price per squared centimeter, which is the logic he's adding in. This way of coding I've got in front of you helps you see the variables and the variable connections much more clearly. And it's very, very important that between the lecture notes and this video, you grasp what we are trying to do. We are trying to teach you how to receive input with variables, how to do some calculation, but within the calculation, check some values so you give back only one or the other calculation based on the condition here. If that is true, then you would return from here this. The way that if and else work is that you would only do one. As soon as one is true, you don't bother doing this. It automatically becomes redundant. If that isn't true, then you always go to the alternative condition and you do that. So it shows you the way that they link. And I think the examples in this sheet are very important for you to do a lot of thinking.